When I was born, my father didn't smile, my mother didn't cry. They just stared. Like the hospital handed them the wrong baby. I was Natalie Reed, their firstborn, but I wasn't a boy, and that alone made me their first disappointment. No one ever said it out loud. They didn't have to. I saw it in the way they praised my sister's smile and ignored my awards, in every sigh behind a closed door, and in the way I learned to stop asking for hugs. "It's okay. Maybe next time we'll have a son," I once heard my mom whisper to my dad on a rainy night when I was just 3. And that next time was Allison, my younger sister, born 2 years later. But instead of disappointment, my mom lifted her up and exclaimed, "She's as beautiful as an angel!" I remember it clearly. The whole house lit up. And me? I sat curled up in the corner, hugging my worn-out teddy bear, watching everything unfold, not understanding why I suddenly felt so small. Allison was the spitting image of our mother: golden blonde hair, sky pupil eyes, rosy cheeks, and a smile as sweet as cotton candy. I, on the other hand, inherited my square jaw and deep hazel eyes from my grandmother, the one my mother never spoke kindly of. Allison had a way of getting under people's skin, in a good way. She could break a vintage vase and still be pulled into Mom's arms with a laugh and a, "You little clumsy sweetheart." Meanwhile, if I so much as raised my voice at the dinner table, my dad would slam his knife down and say, "Girls shouldn't be this loud." It didn't take me long to realize that if I wanted to survive in this house, I had to depend on myself. I learned to tie my shoes, pack my own lunch, and walk to school alone by 3rd grade. Allison? She still had breakfast made for her every morning through middle school, as if she were royalty picked straight out of a picture-perfect dream. I never lacked material things. I had clothes, books, and a room of my own, but warmth, validation, and real affection were always just out of reach. They didn't abuse me. They just didn't care. During my senior year of high school, over dinner, one where no one even bothered to ask how my day had been, I finally looked up and said, "I want to study economics. Tennessee State has accepted me, and I got a 40% scholarship." Silence. "Are you sure?" my mother said, her tone as casual as if she were choosing a new vacuum cleaner. "That field's so dry, Natalie," my father added. "Why not pick something more fitting, for a girl, teaching maybe? Or nursing?" I swallowed hard but kept my voice steady. "I like numbers. I want to work in finance." Mom picked up a potato, smirking. "Well, I guess that's your choice. Just don't come crying when you regret it later." Allison, then a sophomore, giggled beside me. "I'm thinking of studying psychology. I've always been good at listening and understanding people." The moment she said it, both my parents nodded in approval, like she had just cured cancer. I stared down at my plate, scraping the now cold gravy with my fork. I'd grown too used to playing second fiddle in my own house. But that night I made myself a quiet promise. I would not let my dream be shaped by the fact that I was born the wrong gender. I would leave this house, live the life I chose, and never again beg for anyone's approval. I met Ethan Marshall in the university library during my sophomore year. It was one of those sudden fall downpours, and I ducked into the economics section to look up more material for my inflation cycle paper. I was fumbling through a thick textbook when a deep voice spoke behind me. "Looking for applied macro theory? I just put it back on the shelf over there." I turned and saw him, tall in a light blue wrinkled button-down, thin glasses, and a smile so genuine it caught me off guard. He handed me the book, his hand still damp from the rain. "I'm Ethan, senior in econ. You?" I awkwardly extended my hand. "Natalie, sophomore, also econ." "Well, that's perfect," he said. "I've got a presentation in Professor Ramsey's class tomorrow. Want to come sit in? You'll probably take her next year." I didn't know why I nodded. Maybe it was the way he spoke, calm and kind. Or maybe because he was the first person who noticed me without stamping a label like "too cold for a girl in economics." One class turned into study sessions turned into late-night coffee runs, and those quiet tentative touches slowly became a kiss beneath the red maple outside the library near finals week. Ethan graduated a year before me and landed a job at an investment firm in Nashville, but he didn't leave right away. "I'll wait for you to finish," he said one afternoon, sitting beside me on a wooden bench on campus, his hand wrapped around mine. "If you still want to do this with me." I didn't respond immediately, but my nod that day changed everything. We moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment downtown after I graduated. It was worn, the paint fading, but the kitchen was warm enough for evening meals and the balcony held just enough room for lavender pots. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And to me that was everything. The first time Ethan met my parents was during Thanksgiving. I braced for a tense, awkward evening. Instead, it felt like I'd stepped into a parallel universe. "Oh, Ethan, I've heard so much about you," my mom beamed as she opened the door, pulling him in like he was already family. My dad clapped him on the shoulder. "Bravo Capital, huh? Big firm, impressive." They asked about his job, his future, his parents. They didn't ask about me. Not if I was doing well, if I was happy. No. They only looked at Ethan as if the son they had always wanted had finally arrived. Just late, and through marriage. I forced a smile through the whole dinner, swallowing bites of turkey and cranberry while they praised Ethan's financial career. And my sister? Allison, now a freshman in psychology, sat silently in the corner, eyes locked on Ethan like she wanted to set him on fire. I had never seen Allison jealous before, not until that moment. For once, I had something she wanted but couldn't claim. 1 year later, on an early spring evening just after the city had shaken off its final winter chill, Ethan got down on one knee in the middle of our apartment's living room, holding a small silver ring in his hand, and said, "Natalie, you're the only one who makes everything make sense to me. Will you marry me?" I threw my arms around him and cried, and said yes without a second of hesitation. I wanted a small wedding, close friends, candlelight, peace. But my mother didn't. "You only get married once, why make it so plain? We need a proper ceremony, a big church, 10 banquet tables." "It's not we, Mom," I replied gently. "It's me and Ethan. And this is our choice." We held the ceremony in a small garden behind a friend's old colonial home. Close friends beamed with joy. I wore a simple lace dress I chose myself. Ethan stood waiting beneath an arch of white flowers, eyes fixed on me the entire ceremony. I had just begun a new chapter in life. What I didn't know was that, behind Allison's smile, jealousy had already begun to quietly stir, and that the very people I shared blood with would soon sow devastation into what seemed like the perfect marriage. After the wedding, I thought life would settle into something peaceful. Ethan and I returned to our little apartment and slipped into a slower rhythm amid the city haze. I loved our evening meals together, Sunday mornings wandering the farmer's market, and the quiet hours spent lying side by side reading, saying nothing yet feeling perfectly understood. But that calm didn't last long. "Allison told me you two might be expecting," my mother said during her first call after the wedding, as if waiting for me to confirm the fantasy she had written in her head. I smiled faintly. "We're still paying off the mortgage, Mom, not rushing it." "Mortgage or not, motherhood doesn't wait for anyone. I had you when I was 22. At first I stayed silent, but soon after, the second, the third, and every time beyond, I pushed back. I snapped. I blocked numbers. I postponed family dinners. But nothing stopped them. My family, which, let's be honest, only meant Mom, Dad, and Allison, began revolving around one obsession: when I would give them a grandchild. Ethan tried to comfort me. "Let them talk, we'll live our life our way." He was still the kind man I fell for, but I couldn't silence the whispers that always returned after visits to my parents' house. Then one evening, Allison dropped the bomb. "I'm pregnant," she announced, not in a shy whisper but loud and proud over dinner, with a grin that dared anyone to look away. "It's Brian's," she added, as if the name had weight. Brian? Her boyfriend of barely 4 months, unemployed, couch surfing at a friend's place. Mom didn't care. She jumped up, hugged Allison like she'd just been crowned Queen of Fertility. "Finally, I'm going to be a grandma," she shrieked, then turned sharply toward me, her voice slicing through the noise. "And you, Natalie? When will you give us something?" I sat in silence, fists clenched under the table. Ethan lightly touched my thigh, signaling me to hold it in. But it didn't stop there. As Allison's belly grew, my parents transformed her room into a nursery, bought a crib, plastered the walls with pastel wallpaper, and hung a name sign that read Baby Hazel, as though the child was the center of the universe. They invited Ethan over to help assemble furniture, asked him to help pick out diapers, even asked for his opinion on stroller. At first Ethan seemed hesitant, but he didn't say no. "Hazel's really sweet," he said on the ride home. "Being around her makes me want one of our own." I forced a crooked smile. "We're trying, remember?" We did try. I downloaded a cycle tracking app, took prenatal vitamins religiously, read dozens of articles on optimal positions, foods, timing. Each month was a cycle of hope and letdown. The pregnancy test always showed a single line. After every failure, I told myself, maybe next month. But the next month was always the same, and the month after that too. Meanwhile, Hazel was born. The entire house exploded with baby photos, live streams of her tiny laughs, and every time I visited, my mother never failed to remark, "Look at Allison, so natural, so maternal, a real woman." The first comment made me smirk. The next one hit deeper. By the third, I had already booked a doctor's appointment. Ethan went with me. He held my hand in the waiting room and whispered, "No matter what the results say, I'm not going anywhere." I wanted to believe him, really, I did. The doctor examined me, ran labs, did an ultrasound. A week later, we returned for the results. She looked at me, voice soft. "I'm sorry, the results show your fertility is extremely low, nearly non-existent." My ears rang. Ethan squeezed my hand, but I couldn't feel anything. I walked out of the clinic like someone who had just been hit by a train. A few days later, I decided to tell my parents. I still had a sliver of hope. "I can't have children," I said during dinner while Hazel played on the rug nearby. Silence. Then my mom let out a short, bitter laugh. "What did you just say?" "We saw a doctor. It's confirmed, infertility." My mother set her knife down. "Good Lord! A woman who can't bear children? Is she even still a woman?" My dad muttered, not looking at me. "A beautiful vase that can't hold flowers." Allison snapped her fingers at Hazel and whispered with a smirk, "At least I know how to keep a man." I looked at Ethan, hoping, pleading, that he would stand up, say something. But he lowered his head, said nothing. I stood. My throat burned. "Thanks for dinner. Next time, don't invite me if all you want to do is judge." I walked out of that house. The cold wind stung my face. And for once, I wasn't sure if Ethan was still the one I could count on through life's storms. I started noticing the small things. Ethan began visiting my parents' house more often. At first, he used excuses like, "Mom asked me to fix the coffee maker," or "Dad invited me to watch the game." But the visits became more frequent. Some weekends I'd wake up and he was already gone. When I asked, he'd shrug and say, "I just stopped by your place. Hazel misses me." Hazel. Ever since she started calling Ethan uncle, everything shifted. Ethan bought her stuffed animals, read bedtime stories to her every night, even took her to the park when Allison was too tired to parent. I didn't blame the child, but every time I saw the way Ethan looked at Hazel, my heart felt like it was being ripped in two. One evening, curled up in the study, I accidentally opened Instagram on my laptop. A tagged post with Ethan's name popped up. My heartbeat slowed. A photo of 3 people, Ethan on the middle seat of the couch, Hazel in his lap, and Allison, resting her head on his shoulder, her arm draped around his back. Casually but unmistakably, the caption read, "Precious time with the most important people in my life." I couldn't breathe. My mind spun. I read the caption once, then again. The most important people in his life were my sister and her child? I didn't text Ethan, didn't call, didn't confront. I needed the truth, not explanations. On Saturday night, I decided to go to my parents' house unannounced. Ethan had told me he had a reunion with college friends in Franklin. I nodded, said nothing. But instead of heading to our usual cafe, I drove to my childhood home, parked a block away, and walked across the grass I once knew like the back of my hand. The living room lights were still on. Laughter floated through the barely closed window. I stepped closer. "What do you think about Ethan and Allison becoming a real couple?" My mother's voice, soft as air, but sharp enough to freeze me in place. She's still young, she can have more children, unlike Natalie, cold and useless, my father added. What the hell are you all talking about? Ethan's voice, low, but lacking the outrage I had hoped for. Ethan, you've taken care of Hazel like she was your own. Allison needs someone like you, and you deserve a real family, my mother went on, persuasive. Then Allison, in her usual sickly sweet tone, chimed in. I don't want to ruin anyone's happiness, but I can't keep pretending either. I love you. I didn't hear Ethan respond, but his silence said it all. I opened the door and walked in. Everyone turned. Allison's face went pale. My mother held her breath. My father dropped his newspaper, and Ethan couldn't look at me. Go ahead, I said, my voice like ice. Let's hear the rest of the plan. Do I need to file for annulment or just divorce? Ethan stood up, awkward. Natalie. I'm sorry. Sorry? I laughed bitterly. For pretending all this time or for getting caught? Allison jumped in. I didn't want it to be like this. I looked her in the eye. You've always wanted what was mine, but Ethan isn't a toy. My mother spoke up. Natalie, you need to understand. A man needs a family, and you can't give him one? I turned to Ethan. So, are you going with them? He stayed silent. Very well, I said quietly. I'll pack in the morning. Have your lawyer send over the divorce papers. I don't want anything, not even an explanation. I turned and walked out. The Tennessee night was damp and cold, but inside me there was no room left for feeling. Only a hollow space where trust used to live. I walked away from that marriage with nothing but a suitcase and my dignity intact. No pleading, no tears, no compromises. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen shelf with only 2 lines in a note. I hope you all get what you want. Don't ever come looking for me. The divorce went through quickly. Ethan didn't contest a single clause. Maybe he knew that saying more was pointless. I moved into a small apartment in North Nashville, where no one knew me as Allison's sister or Ethan Marshall's ex-wife. A few months later, Allison and Ethan got married. Small, cozy, lots of flowers and photos of Hazel. I wasn't invited, of course, but it didn't hurt. On the contrary, I felt lighter knowing I was no longer tied to that farce. The gossip reached me through an old co-worker. They were expecting a second daughter, planning to name her Sophie. My parents proudly showed off their 2 angelic granddaughters everywhere they went. I only smiled, no bitterness, no jealousy. I had no space left in my heart for any of that. Instead, I focused on work. I took a new job as a financial analyst for a growing real estate firm. And with a packed schedule, there was no time left to dwell on regret. One October morning, while rushing to grab coffee before a meeting, I bumped into a man carrying a laptop. Hot latte spilled onto his dress shirt. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I scrambled to grab napkins. He laughed, immediately calming me. It's all right, my coffee wasn't that hot anyway. That was Ryan Carter, 38, founder of a construction tech startup. We chatted briefly and he asked for my number. I hesitated, but something in his eyes, calm, unhurried, made me say yes. Our first date was at a small restaurant near Centennial Park. No performance, no invasive questions, just honest stories and comfortable silences. I told him about my past, the infertility, the broken marriage. Ryan held my hand, looked straight into my eyes. I don't need a perfect family. I just want someone real. We got married a year later, at City Hall. No white dress, no fancy invitations, just us and a few close friends. Ryan didn't need a crowd. He just needed me. Life with him was unusually peaceful. We cooked together, grocery shopped together, listened to music on Friday nights. I no longer had to prove I was enough every single day. One morning, I woke up feeling nauseous and dizzy. Ryan thought I had the flu, but the feeling lasted over a week. He insisted I see a doctor, and then the doctor looked at me and smiled gently. Congratulations, Natalie, you're pregnant. I froze. That's impossible. I was diagnosed as infertile. The human body is always full of surprises, she said. It's rare but not impossible. I carried the ultrasound printout home, my hands trembling. Ryan took the paper, looked at the image, then looked at me. Is it real? He asked, almost whispering. I nodded, and he held me for a long time. Said nothing, just buried his face in my hair and cried. 9 months later, I gave birth to a baby boy weighing just over 7 pounds at the Central Hospital. I named him Caleb Ryan Carter, the unexpected gift of my life. As I held him in my arms, I no longer remembered the cruel words, the condescending looks, or the months spent wrestling with failure. I saw only a tiny being, a living reminder of my own rebirth. Ryan whispered in my ear, "You won, not through anger but through love." I had no intention of ever facing my old family again. The city was big enough to avoid each other, noisy enough to forget. But sometimes, fate picks the perfect moment to test your heart. That night, Ryan and I decided to celebrate Caleb's second birthday with a quiet dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant, Del Fiore, on the second floor of a small boutique hotel near downtown Nashville. Caleb was staying with my best friend's son for the evening, while we sat by the window, soft wine and scented candles, framing our laughter. Until I looked toward the corner of the room. Allison, wavy hair, tight dress, laughing brightly with a man who wasn't Ethan. He was stroking her thigh under the table, and Allison leaned in to whisper something in his ear that turned his cheeks red. I didn't look away. Instead, I took out my phone, switched to silent mode, and snapped a few clear photos. Then I put the phone away, raised my glass, and smiled as if nothing had just happened. Ryan sat across from me, eyes searching. I gave a small nod. Old story, but maybe it's finally reaching its end. A year later, on a crisp October morning, I took Caleb, now 3 years old, to the local grocery store. He ran ahead between the aisles, tightly gripping his red toy truck. And then I heard a familiar voice. "Natalie?" I turned around. It was my mother. Behind her stood my father, Allison, and Ethan, all 4 of them frozen in the produce section like time had trapped them. They started to turn away until their eyes landed on Caleb. A little boy with deep brown eyes like mine, but a smile and nose that were unmistakably Ryan's. "And this is," my mother stammered, eyes fixed on Caleb. "His name is Caleb," I said calmly. "He's my son." Allison burst into laughter. "Here we go again. Everyone knows you can't have kids. Who are you trying to fool?" I bent down, lifted Caleb into my arms, and held him close. I gave birth to him naturally, and no, I don't owe an explanation to people who once treated me like garbage. My mother stepped forward, eyes glassy. "Natalie, we were wrong. Let me hold my grandson just once." I stepped back. "You lost the right to call yourself a grandmother the day you cast me aside because I couldn't give you a grandchild on your schedule." Allison flushed red. "Seriously, Natalie? Still playing the victim? You finally had a baby. You should be thanking us." I laughed, eyes locked on hers. "Oh, thank you for stealing my husband? Or for putting on the perfect family show for 3 years while sneaking around behind Ethan's back?" The air froze. Ethan turned to Allison, eyes narrowing. "What is she talking about?" I opened my phone, pulled up the folder I had saved a year ago, and held the screen in front of him. "She called it a business meeting. But tell me, do you kiss co-workers in private dining rooms?" Ethan snatched the phone, staring at the screen. His expression shifted from shock to rage. "Allison?" His voice raspy. Allison's jaw dropped. She stammered. "It was just a moment. It didn't mean anything." "What about Rose?" Ethan asked, his eyes blazing. "You made me sign the birth certificate. Now I want to be sure." 3 weeks later, I heard Ethan had taken a DNA test. The result? He was the one who was infertile, which meant neither Hazel nor Rose was biologically his. Ethan filed for divorce and refused to pay support. Allison was kicked out of the shared home, carrying both children back to her parents' house. No job, no husband, no title. They called me. They came knocking at my door. My mother cried outside, begging to see her grandson. I didn't open the door. Ryan stood beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. "You don't have to go back there. Family is who chooses to stay, not who chose to leave." I looked at Caleb playing in the yard, sunlight catching his golden brown hair. "I know," I replied, "and I already have everything I need." In the weeks that followed, the doorbell rang more often than usual. Sometimes it was my mother standing at the gate with a box of pastries like she could rewind time. Sometimes it was my father, pale as a ghost, awkwardly asking about his grandson. And sometimes it was Allison, the same woman who once stepped on me with her chin held high. Now silent, exhausted, holding Hazel and Rose by the hand, trying to say something kind through the iron gate. They said they'd realized their mistakes, that they just wanted a chance to make things right, that Caleb deserved to know his roots. I didn't open the gate, not once. Instead, I sat in the living room, watching the security feed, listening to everything they said, not to forgive but to remind myself, not everyone who's shown up in your life deserves to return. Ryan always stayed quietly beside me. He didn't push, didn't speak on my behalf, didn't rage for me. One afternoon, as I sat staring at Caleb's drawing of the three of us, Ryan came up behind me, wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "Family isn't about blood. It's about love, respect, and loyalty. It's about the ones who stay, even after they know everything about you." I didn't reply. I just held his hand tightly, as if letting go for even 1 second would shatter me. That spring, Caleb started preschool. At the first parent meeting, the teacher handed out a form with the question, "Who's in your family?" Caleb sat beside me, holding a sky blue crayon, and drew 3 people. One with curly hair like mine, one tall with glasses like Ryan, and a smiling child. Underneath, in scribbled letters, he wrote, "Mom, Dad, Ryan, and me. No one else." I turned to him. "Why did you write that?" Caleb looked up, eyes clear as day. "Because that's our family, Mommy." I laughed, tears falling before I even noticed. Ryan gave my shoulder a light squeeze and the teacher just smiled and nodded. We bought a small house in the suburbs when Caleb turned 4. Nothing fancy, just a yard for him to run in, a warm kitchen for dinner together, and a big bookshelf where I could teach him to read every letter. Each night, after Caleb fell asleep, I'd look at him, then look at Ryan. The man who didn't come into my life with thunder but with quiet persistence and genuine care. I once thought I'd lost everything when I left Ethan. But I was wrong. I lost a family to find a real home. I don't carry hatred, but I do remember. I remember who turned away when I collapsed. Who stayed silent when I needed them most and who stood by me, even when I had nothing left but a broken heart. I don't need my mother to hold my child. I don't need my father to recall the day I was born. I don't need Allison showing up with her kids to reconnect bloodlines. Because blood doesn't define family, choice does. Ryan chose me, Caleb chose to call him Dad. And I chose myself. I chose to rise when the world walked away. I chose kindness, even after betrayal. I chose to love myself, so I could love others with a heart that's no longer broken. Family doesn't have to be where you were born. It's where people stay when everyone else walks away. I was once an abandoned wife, a betrayed sister, a daughter treated like a burden. But now, I am a free woman. A joyful mother, a wife, love the right way. And that is enough. Natalie's story reminds us, not everyone who shares your blood deserves to be called family. Sometimes it's the ones closest to us who cause the deepest wounds. But what truly matters isn't what broke us, it's how we rise, heal, and choose the people who are worth keeping. A real family is built on love, respect, and loyalty, not sacrifice for shallow approval. What do you think about Natalie's choices and how she rebuilt her life? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to follow the channel for more touching, real, and powerful stories about family and life.